The first step is to cut up the blank size. Now the first step is to cut it to a minimum of 5/8 of an inch square and then cut it to the length of the brass tube that's in the pan kit. Now the next step is to drill the hole in the center of the blank using a 7mm drill bit. The easiest way to do that is to use a device such as this clamp to hold it vertical as you drill the hole on your drill press. Now once you have the hole drilled, you want to glue the brass tube into the blank. Instant glue will make this very simple and fast, and I would recommend that you use the thick so that it'll fill any voids. I like to run just a little bead inside the tube on the one end and then apply the glue to the brass tube, kind of spiral it up the tube like this as you go. Now we'll insert it from the opposite end, and you'll want to work this back and forth to get that glue covering the brass tube completely. Now it's very important that after you've glued the tube into the blank that you trim that flush with the tube and square. The easiest way to do this is to use a barrel trimmer as shown here. Now the trimmer will cut that square and flush with the brass tube. It will also clean out any excess glue inside the brass tube. Now that the pen blanks are ready to go, the next step is to set up the machine. Now if you have a 900, 1200, or 1800, the spindle shaft has a number 2 Morse taper, and you'll simply use a pen mandrel with the number 2 Morse taper. However, on the Revo, we're going to replace the drive plate right here with a drill chuck. Start by removing the nut on the front of the spindle shaft here, and then replace it with the drill chuck. Now we can insert the pen mandrel and tighten it in place. Now that we've got the pen mandrel in place, we'll mount the stock with the spacers. So we'll remove the nut and then put on one spacer followed by a blank, a second spacer, second blank, a third spacer, and then replace the nut right here. The next step is to set up the gears for an 1.5" pitch. We'll need the 0.25 gear reduction set to give you this range. Then go ahead and engage the gears. And we set the drive gear right here to the F gear, and that will give us the 1.5" pitch. It's very important that you set the tailstock correctly. If you put too much pressure on the pen mandrel, it will bow and distort your pen. So the way that we'll do this is we'll actually close the clamp completely to begin with. And then we'll slide that forward and put a little bit of pressure on by hand as we tighten the tailstock into place. Now that the tailstock is supporting the mandrel, we can go ahead and tighten the thumb screw. Just tighten it down by hand to begin with, and then use a pair of pliers to rotate it an additional 1/2 turn. Now we'll slide the router forward until it is centered directly over the stock, or reading 0 on the y-axis scale, and we'll put a stop right there at that position. Now we'll go ahead and set the plunge depth. Set the plunge depth so just the tip of the bit is touching the spacer. Now you don't want the router bit to run into the drill chuck, so you can position the router so it just clears the chuck itself, and then we can set a stop on the backside in the x-axis. Once I finished that first cut, I loosened the knob right here and then slid the router back out of the way. Next, we'll need to reposition the carriage a ½ inch. The reason you'll do this is because the router bit is a ½ inch in diameter, and anytime you're forming a rope, you always reposition it exactly the width of the cutter. So we'll open the split nut here on the back of the carriage, slide it over the ½ inch, and lock it back in position. Now we'll need to crank it back to our starting point. Now that the router is positioned for the second start, we'll turn it on, position it over the center, and make the second cut. Now we'll just repeat the process over again. Open the split nut, slide it back the ½ inch, lock it back onto the lead screw, bring it up to our starting point, and make the last cut. Once the 3 spiral cuts are made, the last step is to open the split nut and position the center of the router bit at the end of the blank to turn it round. Repeat this step for both ends of each blank. Now the pen's ready to finish, let's take it out of the machine. Now, if you've used the ornamental mill before, you know that it's not going to require a great deal of sanding to finish these parts. The way that we'll finish a rope design is by using the flutter sheets as shown here. Then, once it's sanded up, I'm going to use a buffing wheel and some French polish to finish the pen. Now that the pen blanks are all sanded and polished, we're ready to go ahead and assemble the pen. Now we'll just use the same clamp that we used to drill the blanks with. We'll start with the tip. Just insert that and then press it into place. Next, we'll press the mechanism into the opposite end of the same blank. Be sure to insert the brass end first. You press this in until it just goes past the end of the brass. Now we'll do a test fit with the pen cartridge. Insert that in and then check to see that it comes out far enough and retracts back in. You can always press this in a little bit farther if you need to. Next, we'll just slide the sleeve on. Now we'll insert the clip. The final step is to just slide the two halves together. Now you can see how easy and fast it is to produce a beautiful pen like this using the Legacy Ornamental Mill. This is just one simple style. For other examples, you can check out our website at www.legacywoodworking.com.